Hello, writers, and welcome to session 6 of the Write That Book Now writing course. And today I'd like to cover two separate issues, sort of unrelated, except they're related by writing. The second one is something we've dealt with before, which is about structure. So I went through the 7 structures, talked about the 7 structures and talked more deeply about the warrior's journey. So this time I'd like to look at it just from a more practical point of view, from a minute by minute kind of what to write next. And first, I'd like to kind of quickly just talk about a few things not to do. So this is a writing course about how to write, but of course, the how to not to thing is also important. Now, Stephen King, as you probably heard of him, and you've probably heard of his book called On Writing, his 2 pet peeves were redundancy, saying things that didn't need to be said, saying things that had been said, repetition, going over and over. Get on with it, he says. The other main pet peeve was the overuse of adjectives and adverbs. Now, his advice is that once you've written your story, in the first editing, you should take out at least 10% of what you've written, which is a bit sad for us, our baby. Destroy it. And most of that deletion, he suggests, is adverbs and adjectives. Because if we can't tell the story without embellishing it with adverbs and adjectives, he says we're not telling the story. The story in itself should tell us these things. So I'm just going to take a few examples that I've got here. One of them is in a recent issue of People magazine. It referred to an incredibly popular, groundbreakingly racy sitcom. I mean, that's tough to say, even when you don't have to move your lips. An incredibly popular, groundbreakingly racy sitcom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 adjectives. So it's kind of a good idea maybe to choose 1 and 2 at the most. In a book called Still Life with Crows, Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child describe a mysterious row of corn in the middle of a field. It was, in fact, the only row that actually opened onto the creek. Here are 2 attempts at emphasis: in fact and actually. But they just adjunct to the sentence. So if we remove them both, and the word only carries the burden of the sentence with efficiency and precision, it was the only row that opened onto the creek. Much simpler, much more powerful. There's 3 other words that I think we can take out 99% of the time. The words are very, they are so, and they are quite. And if we go through our writing and take out very and take out so, in a sense of it's so good. I don't mean so we did that. It means as in terms of emphasizing something. And the third one, quite. So I'm going to read 2 sentences, one with, one without. So the first is, he was very tall. If we take out very, we just say, he was tall. Now, to me, the second one is simpler, but it also kind of makes them sound even taller. When we take out the very, it makes it sound even more. So the emphasis actually de-emphasizes. Just another example is with quite. So we could say she was quite picky. Or we could say she was picky. And somehow taking quite out, which is supposed to emphasize, it does emphasize it when we take it out. So writing is generally more powerful without these emphasis words. We can keep it simple, direct, and crisp. And if we can read it, and of course, every single time, the best thing for all of us to do is do our writing and then read it out aloud to ourselves or to our pet mouse or whatever. Read it out loud. That will tell us how it scans. Is it rhythm? Does this word need to be there? Can the sentence be said somewhere else? while we're reading it to ourselves, it tells us everything we need to know, usually. So the other one is repetition, which is kind of links in with Stephen King's redundancy thing. And just about every writer has some sort of kind of favorite word. And if you've ever seen Hillary Clinton interviewed, or you read her book, I haven't, but apparently I'm told that her word is eager. She loves the word eager. It's all over the place. And Cosmopolitan magazine editor Kate White uses quickly over a dozen times in A Body to Die For. Jack Kerouac, never know how to say his word, the American traveling writer, shall we say. One of his favourite words, the word that appears most in his book On the Road, is sad. Everything's sad, sad, sad. And even sometimes he uses it sad, 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 comma, sad. And Anne Parker's in The Dive from Clawson's Pier is weird. That's the word that appears the most in her book, weird. So we all have a favourite thing. And on top of words, there's also punctuation. Now, my book, my Australian thriller that I wrote, the first of a trilogy called Scars Can't Tell, I sent it off to my friend and editor, Ian, and he found 1,011 exclamation marks. 1011. Yes. I mean, I had no idea I'd put so many in. And I think I was infected by my phone, by texting, because I realize that when I do text, I use exclamation marks a lot. And so we've become more, our writing on paper and books is being infected, influenced by how we write in text, which is a totally different discipline. So just have a think about the words you use a lot, and have a think about the punctuation you use a lot. We don't need 1,000 exclamation marks in any book. Doesn't matter how exciting it is. So another one is commas. The funny little things that suggest a pause. That's what they're there for. When we're speaking, we pause. And we stop and we da-da-da. And we have longer pauses for different things, shorter and longer pauses. So again, how do you decide whether you use a comma? Read the sentence out. If you pause momentarily between any words, there should be a comma. If it's a longer pause, there should be a semicolon. And if you stop for a longer pause, a full stop's probably needed. And some say that a pause for a half a second should be shown with a comma. Pause for a full second should be a semicolon, and longer is a colon or a hyphen or a full stop or a new sentence. So again, the comma, semicolon, and then the full stop are measures of how long the pause is. And obviously, the full stop is for a new sentence, for a different phrase altogether, as well as a stop. So there are 4 main reasons for a comma. It's an introductory element. There should be a comma between an introductory word or phrase and the rest of the sentence. For example, in the novel Twilight, Bella lives in Forks. So we put a comma after Twilight because we introduced in the novel Twilight, da-da-da. So, and I also had a break when I said that. In the novel Twilight, Bella lives in Forks. So when we say it, and automatically there's a break. So in a compound sentence, when has 2 or more parts joined by a conjunction. So before the conjunction, insert the comma, and after the conjunction. For example, the recipe sounded simple, but Jody burnt the cookies. So there's kind of 2 sentences, but they are linked. So the recipe sounded simple, but Jody burnt the cookies. It's just kind of simple stuff, and it's kind of obvious, but sometimes we need to point it out to ourselves, because sometimes we find ourselves at the bargain bin basement bin prices of commas and we end up with hundreds of them and they don't need to be there. And other times we end up spare. So we need to be fairly consistent with them. And just thinking about them gives us that consistency. The other one, the third use of a comma is with a non-restrictive element. So if there is a part of a sentence that could be removed and the sentence would still make sense, the part that could be removed, we put commas around that. So to separate it from the rest of the sentence. For example, on WikiHow, the world's largest how-to manual, there are over 100,000 how-to articles. See, we could say on WikiHow, there are over 100,000 how-to articles. But we've added the little bit in the middle as an extra explanation, the world's largest how-to manual. So we put a comma after WikiHow, a comma after manual. On WikiHow, the world's largest how-to manual, there are over 100,000 how-to articles. So when there's a non-restrictive element, when a part of a sentence doesn't have to be there, but it helpful, comma bound around it. And obviously the last use of a comma is for a series of things. And this is where we get into that little discussion about Oxford commas, which have nothing to do with Oxford. They were invented in America. It seems the Americans need more prompting. I'll try and say it kindly. So when we have a series of things, so Jane needed to buy milk, eggs, cheese, and butter. So the English and the original Australian system would be Jane needed to buy milk, comma, eggs, comma, cheese, and butter. Because originally in English, and, but, hence, therefore, they were all substitutes for commas. We always stop for a but. We always stop for an and, momentarily. And then the Americans came along and said, no, we need someone to tell us, because we don't know about ands and buts, we need a comma there. So if you're writing for the American market, you would have Jane needed to buy milk, comma, eggs, comma, cheese, comma, and butter. That's the Oxford comma, the one just before the and. So I'm not going to get into what's right and wrong, but it depends on your market. So now you can astound your friends at Literary Cocktail Party with your erudition about commas and repetition and redundancy. And quite